This episode of Hot Cup Cold Case contains disturbing details about a violent crime and may not be appropriate for some listeners. I'm Brant.
I'm Rachel.
And this is Hot Cup,
Cold Case.
where every couple of weeks we invite you into our apartment. What is it?
I'm just laughing at you.
Why?
Because you were like legit yelling. And then it just brought back. This is Hot Cup Cold Case.
We're recording this intro again because apparently I was yelling the first time we did it.
Okay, let's do it again. I don't think we've ever recorded this many times.
I'm often unaware of the volume of my voice, and Rachel has to remind me.
He yells all the time. Okay, start over.
Oh, we don't have to start over. We'll just pick up where we left off. We're here to share with you the two things that keep us up at night. And the first is a hot cup of caffeine, which we've got right here. And the second is a cold case. And the third thing that keeps me up at night is when my wife randomly screams at the top of her lungs in her sleep.
It's not my fault.
Do you have night terrors?
I guess. It's always like true crime related. I think we do this too much. Someone's always attacking me, I'm running from something, or it's like secret agent style.
Like you're the secret agent?
I guess. I don't really remember them.
Well, I remember them. Folks, imagine being jarred awake in the middle of the night by the sound of somebody sleeping next to you screaming at the top of her lungs into the silence.
When was this?
You've done it at least 3 times in quarantine. And what's even scarier now is that our daughter is doing it.
Hey, I did not teach her to do that. That's rude.
No, she apparently inherited her night shrieking from you.
I guess so, but she has been like night sitting too, or sleep sitting.
Yeah, she has. She might actually get that from me because I did sleepwalk when I was a kid.
Yeah, that terrifies me. We're putting a gate up.
Rach's cousins here in Michigan recently asked us to watch their house while they were in Texas. And it's a little weird staying at someone else's house. I usually like to sleep with something next to me that I could use to defend myself should I need to in the middle of the night. But I had no idea what your cousins had available. So I just began looking around the house for like a baseball bat, maybe a golf club. Never did I expect to find your cousin's antique sword collection. And I unsheathed a pirate cutlass and slept with that thing under my pillow.
Yeah, I didn't even know they had that.
Yeah, I had Rach take a picture of me with it. We'll post it on our Instagram and Facebook. Bless
Sorry.
you.
There'll be a little bit of sniffles on this podcast. Allergies in Michigan are nuts right now.
Oh, yeah. The quarantine has officially been lifted, and I cannot go outside because the cottonwood trees here are shedding their seeds, and I have been sneezing my head off for the past 2 days.
It's been crazy.
So if we sound a little nasally, that's why. I also haven't had my hair cut in over 3 months, and I now look like Jim Halpert from The Office with his wingtip hairstyle.
It's pretty crazy. We are in desperate need of a haircut.
Well, I had a man bun prior to the pandemic, and I chopped it off. And then COVID-19 hit, and the man bun is almost back. So I feel like the universe just wants me to have a man bun.
Bring it on. I just scratched my neck and my sunburn.
Are you okay?
Yes.
Guys, Rach has a home remedy for sunburns. And I am not kidding when I tell you, it is the most pungent thing I have ever smelled. It smells like dirty gym socks. What is in that stuff?
Babe, it's just apple cider vinegar. Vinegar is a natural healing agent.
Oh, God.
It really does work, though, I'm telling you. It stinks to high heaven, but it works.
Yeah, so if you want to trade being in pain for being lonely because no one wants to be around you, then
Brant!
Try Rach's home remedy.
I hope you heard me. I just whopped him. It's so rude. Don't be tacky.
Well, I have a cold case for you tonight.
And I will be back with a case soon, podcasters.
And then, Rach, you've got a mugshot story for us, right?
Yeah, I just have 2 mini ones.
Oh, 2 mini mugshots.
Yes.
Well, before we get into that tonight, I have a Lori Vallow case update for you.
I just want to remind everyone that when we do our cases, we do not tell each other about them. And Brant mentioned that he was going to do the update for it and forbid me to go look at the news.
So this is the first time Rach is hearing this. So for our listeners who aren't familiar with the case, we covered it extensively in episode 12, The Doomsday Preppers in the Suburbs with a Divine Mission. And we've been providing new updates as they become available at the beginning of each episode. So here's the basic storyline. 5 people in the life of Lori Vallow and her husband, Chad Daybell, are either missing or dead, and all under strange circumstances. Those people are Lori's 4th husband, Charles Vallow, Chad's first wife, Tammy Daybell, Lori's brother, Alex Cox, and Lori's 2 children, JJ and Tylee. Back in January of this year, 2020, ABC News filed a Freedom of Information Act request with Arizona's police department for any and all public records regarding Lori Vallow. Those records have recently been released, and they include the body cam footage of a local law enforcement officer's conversation with Charles Vallow prior to his death.
What?
In the video, Charles tells the officer that Lori kept referring to him as Nick Schneider, which, if you remember, is the name of the demon she believed had taken control of his body.
Right.
Charles then told the officer that Lori had been withdrawing large sums of money from their bank accounts and that he hadn't been able to get in touch with his 2 children, JJ and Tylee. He said he was afraid Lori may be responsible for their disappearance and added, quote, "I don't know what she's going to do to them. I don't know if she's going to flee with them or if she's going to hurt them," end quote. In the subsequent police report filed by the officer who spoke with Charles, he wrote, quote, "During my conversation with Charles, I found his demeanor to be strange for a person in his circumstances. He seemed more concerned with asking questions about the legality of financial withdrawals Lori had made than her alleged incoherence," end quote. Meanwhile, police have been investigating the death of Lori's brother Alex, who shot and killed Charles back in 2019 and was later discovered dead in his home. Well, just a few days ago, from the date of this recording, the reports from Alex's autopsy were finally released to the public.
Okay.
And the cause of his death has officially been listed as a pulmonary blood clot. So as far as we know, it was natural causes that killed Alex Cox. However, police are still reviewing the autopsy report and the investigation into his death is still active. And just recently, East Idaho News was granted an exclusive interview with Melanie Gibb. She was the host of the podcast Lori and Chad were featured on called Preparing a People, and she's a close friend of theirs. Melanie has actually been in hiding since December of 2019 when the investigation into Lori and Chad began, and during that time she's been cooperating with the police, but said she's been hiding out of, quote, fear for her safety, fear for what will be reported in the media, fear for her family, and fear that something could happen to her, end quote. Melanie recently told reporters that she was with Lori Vallow the day they met Chad Daybell, and remembers Chad telling Lori, quote, they had met in a previous life and had been married multiple times before in prior existences, end quote.
That's weird.
Melanie said that shortly after that meeting, both Lori and Chad acquired separate phone lines, which they used just to talk to each other. Melanie also said that one day, while she and Lori were together, Chad called to talk to Lori about her husband, Charles. Chad said that an evil spirit had, quote, attached himself to Charles and now he has entered his body and taken over it. Chad also said that, quote, it was their commission to get rid of all the zombies before tribulations come upon us, end quote. Melanie said she once asked Lori, why is everybody in your life turning into zombies? Why is everybody after you? I don't understand. And Lori told Melanie, quote, well, it's because Satan really hates me. And because of my exaltation and the level I'm exalted to, they're coming straight after me, end quote. Melanie also claims that Chad called her the day after police showed up at Lori's house in search of her missing children. She said Chad told her, quote, when the police call, don't pick up the phone. To which she added, quote, my heart dropped deeper and I just knew something was wrong, end quote. After her call with Chad ended, Melanie said Lori called her sounding very cheerful. And Melanie said, quote, She asked me to tell the police that JJ was with me.
Mm-mm.
And then Lori said, I told the police that you were at Frozen 2 with JJ. Get your cell phone out and take a picture of random kids running around to make it look like you have him with you.
Oh, that's
End
fantastic.
quote. Melanie said she refused to do it, and that's when she went to the police. Isn't that frightening?
Yes.
A few days later, with JJ and Tylee still missing, Melanie called Chad to demand answers, and Lori answered the phone. Melanie asked, why haven't you told us where the kids are? And Lori responded, quote, well, for your safety, we cannot tell you, end quote.
What?
Melanie said, quote, that was just alarming to me. What safety? Why am I in danger? I didn't feel like I was in danger, end quote. And since that day, Melanie hasn't spoken to either Lori or Chad ever again.
Yeah, this is nuts.
So Melanie went on to say that she doesn't believe JJ and Tylee are still alive. She said, quote, they're not on this planet anymore. I don't think they are. That's my personal opinion. Tylee is a very strong-willed individual, and she's capable of making a phone call if she needs to call, and she hasn't reached out to anybody and let anybody know she's alive. I can't imagine she would be quiet the whole time. And JJ's a handful. He wouldn't have his medication with him, so how could she take care of him? It doesn't add up. If they're in a safe place, why is Lori in Hawaii having a great time on her honeymoon when her children are hiding for safety? That doesn't even make sense.
Right.
End quote. Melanie finished her interview by saying, quote, I really like Chad. I think he's a good guy. He's a nice man. I like him as a person, but his teachings, they're dangerous. End quote. And she also shared her concerns about Chad with Lori and said that on more than one occasion, Lori told her, quote, if Chad is Satan, he sure is a good one. End quote.
No thanks.
This case is so strange.
It really is.
I really do hope they find those kids, but I have a bad feeling that they're not alive too.
Well, yeah, no one's seen Tylee since they went on a little family trip to Yellowstone.
Right. And there's a lot of other internet sleuths out there who think Tylee is still in Yellowstone.
Right.
Hey listeners, we're interrupting this episode from the future because as of this past Tuesday, June 9th, investigators served Chad Daybell a search warrant at his Fremont County residence in Idaho, and it was there that they uncovered the remains of what appeared to be 2 children on his property. Those remains were immediately taken to the medical examiner's office and have positively been ID'd as Lori Vallow's missing children, Tylee and JJ. And following that discovery, Chad Daybell was immediately arrested.
I don't even know what to say.
I don't either. I'm feeling a whole bunch of emotions all at once.
Yeah, I think we all knew, but to have it be solidified, it's just horrible.
Yeah, I think you and I were holding on to this hope that the children really were alive and well, and that hope was shattered this week. So we've been following this case for the past few months, and we'll continue to follow the investigation as more details come to light. I'm heartbroken.
It's just devastating. It's terrible.
So tonight's cold case is one of the coldest we've ever discussed. This is a cold case from almost 100 years ago.
Oh man, that's so weird to think about.
So on September 22nd of 1922, 23-year-old Raymond Schneider and his 15-year-old girlfriend, Pearl Balmer, were strolling down DeRussy Lane, which was a lover's lane in New Brunswick, New Jersey, when they came across another couple napping together in the shade of a crabapple tree. The man was handsomely dressed in a dark gray suit with a Panama hat perched on his face, perhaps to shield his eyes from the sunlight. And the woman beside him was wearing a blue polka-dotted dress with a wool scarf wrapped around her neck. Her head was resting on the man's arm, while her hand gently rested on his knee. But the closer the 2 teens came to the couple in the grass, the more they realized something was very wrong. And upon closer inspection, they discovered that the man had a single gunshot wound to his head, while the woman next to him had 3. The frightened teenagers ran to the nearest house and asked the owner to call the police. Officers arrived on the scene within minutes and quickly identified the bodies of the individuals beneath the crabapple tree, thanks to a business card that had been carefully propped up against the foot of the dead man.
Oh yeah, that's weird.
The card belonged to Reverend Edward Wheeler Hall, the 41-year-old pastor of the local Episcopal Church of St. John the Evangelist. His wife, Frances Hall, was 7 years older than him and the only daughter of one of the most prominent families in the area. She lived in her family's mansion, and it was rumored among people in town that the Reverend had married Frances for her family's fortune. But Frances wasn't the lifeless woman lying next to the Reverend in the grass.
Oh, no.
Her body was quickly identified as Eleanor Reinhardt Mills, the wife of the church's janitor, Jimmy Mills. Eleanor was 34 years old and a mother of two and a soprano singer in the church choir. And she was also rumored to be the Reverend's secret lover.
Mm-hmm.
So investigators believed the bodies of the Reverend and Eleanor had been carefully posed to appear as if they were sleeping together. They also discovered shredded pieces of paper scattered among the weeds around the bodies. News of the murder traveled fast in a small town, and many of the local townsfolk who knew the victims flocked to Dossier Lane, trampling the crime scene in search of souvenirs.
Oh my gosh.
Yes, and I actually have a photograph here that shows a crowd of people carving their initials into the bark of the crabapple tree. Take a look.
What a weird picture. That's crazy.
Yeah. We'll also post this on our social media.
Shame on all of you.
In fact, there were so many people arriving on a daily basis that local vendors eventually set up shops at the crime scene.
No.
They began selling popcorn,
Oh my gosh.
peanuts, soft drinks, and balloons to the hordes of curious visitors.
That is so disturbing.
Yeah, you and I are interested in true crime, obviously.
But we're not going to camp out at a crime scene.
Right, we enjoy talking about the details of the investigation, but we're not going to go chew popcorn at an active crime scene while trampling all over the evidence.
Yeah, no. We have to remember, they didn't have internet, cable, nothing. This was entertainment.
That's true. I remember hearing stories in history class of people during the Civil War who would watch soldiers shoot at each other from nearby hills.
Oh my gosh.
Well, meanwhile, investigators were busy trying to catch a murderer. The autopsies performed on the victims revealed that the Reverend and his mistress had been shot at point-blank range with a .32 caliber automatic pistol. And upon removing Eleanor's blood-soaked scarf, the pathologist also discovered that her throat had been cut from ear to ear, severing her neck to the point that, quote, her backbone could easily be seen.
No, we don't need that much detail.
And investigators also managed to piece together the torn bits of paper that had been scattered around the crime scene, and what they found was nothing short of hot and heavy. The shredded pages turned out to be steamy love letters penned by the Reverend and his paramour. One letter the Reverend had written for Eleanor said, quote, "Oh, honey, I am fiery today, burning, flaming love. The Lord is always near in whatever we do, even in physical closeness, for we know he meant for his children to taste deeply of all things." End quote.
No.
Do you remember the notebook of love letters we used to exchange when we were in college?
Yes, but it wasn't like that.
No, not like that.
And we weren't having an affair.
Right.
We were high school sweethearts. This was wrong.
I remember something I wrote back in 2006. I used to chew a lot of gum, mostly because I wanted my breath to always be fresh for you.
Oh, I remember what you wrote too.
Oh, do you?
Mm-hmm.
You've woken up next to me now for the past 11 years, so you know I've got a case of raging halitosis. It smells like I ate your sunburn remedy.
Gross.
Well, my favorite chewing gum back then was Stride because the package said it was, quote, ridiculously long lasting. And I remember putting one of the gum wrappers in that notebook when we were dating, and I wrote next to it, "Our love is like Stride gum. It's ridiculously long lasting."
Okay. Good to know that's the voice you wanted me to read it in.
Yo, yeah, you were supposed to read it in a sexy voice.
Was that what that was? I do remember that.
Well, these love letters that the Reverend and Eleanor exchanged not only exposed their torrid love affair, but they also suggested a possible motive for the murders.
Mm-hmm.
Detectives began to suspect that either the Reverend's wife, Frances Hall, or possibly Eleanor's husband, Jimmy Mills, may have murdered them in a jealous rage. So investigators began questioning the Reverend's wife, Frances Hall, but they soon discovered that she had an alibi for the night of the murders. Frances told them she was home that night, and her household maid, Louise Geist, corroborated her story. So next, detectives questioned Eleanor's husband, Jimmy Mills. Jimmy told them that he not only served as the janitor for the local church, but that the Reverend had been one of his closest friends. And he too had an alibi for the night of the murders. Jimmy said he was home working in his shop, a story his neighbors later corroborated by telling investigators they remembered hearing the sounds of Jimmy's hammer that night. Then, a local hog farmer by the name of Jane Gibson shared something with detectives that she had witnessed on the night of the murders. Jane lived near Dossier Lane, where the lovers' bodies had been found, and she claimed that on the night of September 14th, she had been awoken by a sound coming from the cornfield outside her house. Seeing what she thought might be a thief on her property, she then saddled her mule, Jenny, and set out to investigate.
That's adorable.
I don't know why that tickles me so.
Okay, it cracks me up that the mule's name is Jenny.
Well, Jenny told investigators that while she was riding... Oh, wait. Well, Jane told investigators that while she was riding Jenny, she spotted a parked car, and as she got closer, she could hear what sounded like two men and two women arguing back and forth. Next, she heard a woman yell, "Explain these letters," followed by gunshots and a woman screaming, "Henry!"
Oh.
It was at that point Jane said she fled in fear, but not before catching a glimpse of one of the women, who she claimed had white hair, much like the Reverend's wife, Frances.
Uh-oh, Frances.
Did I ever tell you about the time that my friends and I accidentally stumbled upon a lover's lane in the middle of the night, much like our friend Jane here?
It sounds familiar.
I honestly can't remember if I've told you this story, but one night my friends and I were at the pond near my house, and we decided to head home because it was getting late. So as we were leaving, we came across a dead-end road just outside the park, and we noticed a car that belonged to a friend of ours was parked on the road, and so we started heading towards it, thinking maybe she was inside.
Mm-hmm.
And as we got closer, we could tell the car was empty, and so we hung out for a bit thinking maybe she's at the park and she'll show up any minute and we can say hey. And so we're all standing around the car talking when all of a sudden I hear a thump, and I look down and see a sweaty palm pressed up against the foggy glass of the back door.
Let's keep this podcast G-rated, Brant.
I was so uncomfortable.
As much as I'm uncomfortable right now, I don't want to know anymore.
I didn't either. My friends and I saw that and took off like ninjas in the night. We didn't make a sound because we didn't want our friend to know we were there and embarrass her.
Yeah.
And to this day, I have never said a word, and I don't know if she even knows I was there that night. Okay, back to the story. So, a couple months later, in November of 1922, a grand jury was finally convened to consider the case against Frances Hall. But after 5 days of court hearings, no one was ever formally indicted. There just wasn't enough evidence, and the case was closed. And shortly after that, Frances Hall not only left town, she left the continent.
The continent?
Yeah, and traveled to Europe.
That doesn't look suspicious at all.
Well, 4 years went by. And then in 1926, a man by the name of Arthur Ryle was in the process of annulling his marriage to his wife, Louise Geist, who you may remember was Frances Hall's housemaid and the one who corroborated her alibi the night of the murders. Well, in a court document, Arthur stated that his wife, Louise, had once told him that during her time as a maid in the Hall's home, she had learned that the Reverend was planning to elope with his, quote, wonder heart. And Louise then told her husband that Mrs. Hall had left the house that night in search of her runaway husband, accompanied by her brothers, William and Henry, as well as her other cousin, Henry. 2 Henrys.
Oh, no.
So when Mrs. Hall returned, she gave Louise $5,000 in hush money, which may not sound like a lot, but in 1926, that was equivalent to 65 grand.
Yeah, I was about to say, I need to know the equivalent stat.
Mm-hmm.
That is a ton of money.
Yeah.
What pastor's wife has $65,000?
She was the only daughter of a prominent family in the area. They were independently wealthy.
Yeah.
They lived in a mansion.
Okay.
Well, Philip Payne, the editor of a local tabloid in New Brunswick, which is called the Daily Mirror, somehow came across Arthur's court documents and began publishing the details in the paper.
Okay.
The public was outraged by the idea of a wealthy family getting away with murder. And under pressure from the locals, the governor of New Jersey eventually reopened the case. The bodies of both the Reverend and Eleanor were exhumed, and another set of autopsies was performed.
This is some high-tech investigation for the 1920s.
Yeah, and that's when it was discovered that both Eleanor's tongue and larynx were missing. Investigators suspected that the killer or killers may have known that Eleanor's choir singing is what had initially attracted the Reverend and removed her tongue and larynx post-mortem.
What?
Yes. So on January 28th of 1926, police officially arrested Frances Hall in the middle of the night, along with her brother Henry and her cousin, the other Henry. So the trial began on November 3rd, 1926, and the courtroom was packed with reporters and local spectators, and the crowd listened intently as the Reverend and Eleanor's impassioned love letters were read publicly.
Oh, gosh, how embarrassing, especially for the wife.
Yeah, and these letters, let me tell you, they were the 1920s 50 Shades of Grey. One letter penned by Eleanor read, quote, "Sweetheart, my true heart, I know there are girls with more shapely bodies, but I'm not caring what they have. I have the greatest part of all blessings, a noble man's deep, true, eternal love. How impatient I am and will be. I want to look up into your dear face for hours as you touch my body close." End quote.
This is craziness.
Another letter authored by the Reverend read, quote, "Darling Wonderheart."
What kind of name is that? Wonderheart.
I think that's what I'm going to start calling you.
Please do not.
The Reverend said, "I just want to crush you for 2 hours."
Oh my God. Okay, I said G-rated, Brant. I said keep it G-rated. No more.
I think that ship has sailed.
Yeah, no more. No.
He said, "I want to see you Friday night alone by our road, where we can let out unrestrained that universe of joy and happiness we call ours." End quote.
No, you are married. You are a pastor. Shame on you.
So during the trial, the driver of the hearse for the Reverend's funeral testified that although Mrs. Hall had worn a heavy veil during the memorial, he had caught a glimpse of her face that day and saw fresh scratch marks across her cheek. But despite the allegations against her, Frances Hall remained stone-faced during the trial, and newspapers began calling her the Iron Widow because of her stoic demeanor.
Yeah, I would stand stoic too. She just had her marriage exploited in front of everybody, listening to her husband profess his love for someone else.
Well, the Hall family was also able to afford the best lawyers money could buy, and the prosecution knew that their entire case hinged on the testimony of Jane Gibson, that local hog farmer.
Right.
Time had not been kind to Jane, who was now hospitalized for cancer.
Oh no.
But the prosecution insisted she testify as their star witness. So on November 18th, 1926, Jane, who the newspaper dubbed the Pig Woman,
oh gosh,
was wheeled into the courtroom by her attending physicians on her hospital bed, a bed that newspapers said, quote, may prove to be her deathbed. End quote. And I have a picture of it for you.
Oh gosh, this poor lady.
We'll also share this on our social media. Isn't that wild? She testified from her hospital bed.
Yeah, this is one of the craziest pictures I've ever seen.
Look at how packed that courtroom is. Well, Jane's mother was also in attendance. And the entire time Jane was testifying from her stretcher, her own mother sat on the front row of the courtroom mumbling, "Liar. Liar."
Oh my gosh.
I know. Is this case not wild?
Yes.
The jury deliberated for 5 hours before reaching their collective decision. Everyone was on the edge of their seats as the jury's foreperson announced the verdict. Not guilty.
That's crazy. And usually if it's a quick verdict like that, it's usually guilty, not guilty.
Yeah. Frances Hall and her family were all acquitted, and they later sued the Daily Mirror for $3 million.
What's that in today's money?
I'm assuming it was $3 million in today's money, but if it was $3 million in 1926, I think it's the equivalent of like $45 million.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And now I have some of the theories for you.
Oh, I'm pretty sure she got away with murder.
Well, of course, many people believe Frances Hall and her brothers simply got away with murder. Frances later died in 1942, just 16 years after her acquittal. And her mansion was later purchased by Rutgers University as housing for their dean, and I believe they still own it. While others believe Eleanor's husband Jimmy Mills was the killer, he later discovered one of the reverend's diaries that had been in his wife's possessions, and he sold it to a New York paper. And then there are some who believe Jane Gibson, or the pig woman, may have been the real killer.
What?
Yeah, because she was
Why?
there that night. Some other theorists believe thieves may have been responsible for the murders, because the reverend's gold watch and chain were never recovered.
Yeah, but who goes through the trouble of propping up a business card on a man's foot?
Right.
It had to have been personal.
That's what detectives thought, especially for how violent the crime was.
Right.
And here's something really strange. On October 10th of 2013, 91 years after this murder, another woman, also named Frances Hall, ended up murdering her husband, who also had a secret lover.
That's weird.
Isn't that weird? And we're going to talk more about that case in our next episode.
Oh, okay.
And now, a brief message from our sponsors. And by sponsors, I mean our Patreon subscribers.
Hi, my name is Hannah, and I subscribe to Hot Cup Cold Cases Patreon because I love Rachael and Brant, and I love the podcast, and I couldn't stand to miss anything that they produce.
Wow, Hannah, we are beyond grateful for you. And for those of you who are thinking, gee, now I want to subscribe to the Patreon and be just like Hannah, just visit hotcupcoldcasepodcast.com and click on the link for our Patreon. As a subscriber, you'll also receive exclusive access to all of our Red Eye episodes, true stories with an extra shot of strange. Thanks for your support. We couldn't do this without you. All right, I'm ready for my double shot of mini mugshots.
All right. So for my first one. Police in Germany said they caught a man after he stole $5.65 worth of goods from a supermarket.
Okay.
He triggered an alarm as he fled. Police said it didn't take long to find the man and identify him because he left something behind at the crime scene.
Was it his wallet?
No.
Some form of ID?
I'll give you that. It was his 8-year-old son.
Oh my god! Oh my god!
Who takes their kid to a robbery and then who leaves them there when they flee? Oh my god.
I have two questions. Why bring your kid along with you during a robbery? And number two, why did he only get away with $5?
I know. I think he stole $5 worth of things. So I assume it was just like little items. I hope they weren't like in need, but how do you rob someone and then leave your kid?
That is crazy.
I know.
Well, maybe he wasn't planning on robbing the store when he brought his kid along.
Yeah, I hope he didn't mean to, but he sure did. And to make matters worse, he actually fell while he was escaping and ended up spending the day in the hospital as well.
What a day.
I know.
That poor kid.
I know. I feel so bad for him. Well, for my second one, a Scottish man was quickly apprehended after stealing a bottle of vodka from a mini-mart. The dum-dum hit on the cashier and gave her his number and his name as he was fleeing the store.
Oh my god. I can just see him yelling over his shoulder as he's fleeing, "Call me!" Yeah, that doesn't look good for the first date. That's how you know if you go out on a date with that guy, you're paying.
Yeah, or you're dining and ditching.
Yes. Have you ever done that?
No!
Me neither.
You better not. We're going to go back and pay that bill.
Well, hey guys, just a reminder, we love reading stories from you, our listeners. So if you have a story and you share it with us at hotcupcoldcasepodcast.com, you just might hear it on the podcast.
And even if you don't have a story, please share the podcast with your friends and your family and encourage them to listen. The more listeners we have, the more stories we can collect and share with you.
Also, if you're enjoying the show, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or whatever streaming service you're using. The more 5-star ratings and reviews we receive, the easier it becomes for more people to find us.
And finally, for even more things to keep you up at night, follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Hot Cup Cold Case Podcast or subscribe to our YouTube channel.
Hot Cup Cold Case is written and produced by Rachael and myself, with music by Young Kool-Aid. If you ever need your mug filled,
Or your spine chilled,
this is Hot Cup
Cold Case.
I was home alone for lunch, so I
Okay.
decided to raid the refrigerator for leftovers. And we had leftover pizza and leftover fajitas, but we didn't have enough of either to constitute a whole meal for a grown man such as myself. So I
Okay.
decided to combine the elements we did have.
No.
And from the pizza and fajita components, I gave birth to the fajitza.
Brent, that's disgusting.
I've got a photo here for you.
Oh my gosh. It looks absolutely disgusting.
Follow me for more recipes.
So gross.